This video is brought to you by BattleAxe. Part of our mission here at BattleAxe is to help motion designers work more efficiently, and the way that we like to do that is by creating tools anytime that we have a thought of there should be an easier way to do this. And a lot of our tools are actually free. So in this video, I'm gonna share some updates that we've made to a few of our free tools and even how we give our free tools out. But first, in case you missed it, I started a Discord server recently for all things Jake in Motion, and I really want this to be a place for motion designers to be able to gather together, support each other, share their work, and we've already got over 300 members. There's lots of that stuff going on already. I'm in there all the time. You're invited. The link is down in the description, so come join the server and say hi. Now let's take a look at these updates to some of the BattleAxe freebies. First of all, our freebies are now truly free. They're no longer pay what you want, so you couldn't give us money for them even if you wanted to. All you have to do to get access to them is sign up for our email newsletter, which we don't even send out that often, and it's never spammy. Plus, you can always unsubscribe from it and still have access to the freebie download page. We did this just to simplify the whole process for you so you have access to everything on one page, pick and choose what you want to download, and also see all of the updates for every single version of these tools. So you can find the link to that freebies page down in the description. Void is a feature-rich freebie and it's one of my favorites, and we've made a lot of updates to it. The first thing that you'll notice is that the UI is now updated. There's a lot less text. We have new custom icons for the buttons that are responsive to the size of the panel. We have some new functionality and we've removed some functionality. So why don't we start with what we took out? All of the replace features are now gone, and we made this executive decision because we think that it was really causing more issues than problems it was solving. We thought that it might be nice to clean up older project files, removing solid folders completely. But like I said, it was just causing a lot of errors. So we decided to take that out completely. And you can think of Void really as a creation tool now, not as a replacement or an updater tool. Moving forward, you can just have cleaner project files without the solids folder and use voids instead. Variants and volumes have not changed at all. You just click them and it creates an adjustment layer or a solid layer alternative, but the void button has gotten a decent amount of new functionality. So I'm just gonna really quickly run through all of it so you can get a good picture of what it really can do. First of all, I have this scene here with a bunch of windows animating up and just popping onto screen. Without any layers selected, clicking the void button is gonna create a null object replacement layer right in the center of the composition, made from a shape layer, has some nice styling controls, everything is the same as previous versions of Void. But we now also have the option to disable Void visibility. If I turn this off and uncheck this checkbox and click the button again, we still have the same bounding box because the contents of the layer still has that rectangle path, but clicking off of it, that void disappears. There's no styling, so this should help save on render time if you were concerned with that. It'll also not be visible when you're previewing your animations, and I think you're going to like having that option. Now I'm gonna delete that null and show you what happens when you select a layer and then click the void button. It's going to create that new void in the same position as that selected layer, and it'll parent the selected layer to that void, so it's now basically created a controller for that selection, and it preserves the motion. If I scroll through here, you can see that all of that position animation that was happening on that layer is preserved. I can now just reposition it freely just by selecting the layer and clicking the button. It also renames that void layer to match the name of the child layer, so that's really great. Now if I delete that void, and we'll choose a different layer this time, and I'll hold Shift and click on the void layer, it's going to create the void in the center of the comp, but it's still the parent to the selected layer, and this works for any number of layers. So I can grab all of these at once, hold Shift, and click the button, and now I have a null object parent that's the center of the comp. This is useful for a number of reasons. First of all, I have a group controller basically for all the layers that's centered right in the middle, and that way I can just easily grab it and move a group of layers around wherever I want. But the way that I like to use it or think about it is basically reorienting the comp's origin, because by default, After Effects set the X and Y 0 position values at the top left corner. I like to think about things a lot of times in the center of my composition, and creating a parent layer in the center and having all other layers parented to it effectively makes the center of the composition an origin point of 0, 0. And I'll show you, I'll prove it to you. If I bring up the position and I change the X position value to 0, that value in relationship to the X position of the parent object is now the center of the comp. So what this means is that I could symmetrically offset some of these. If I change this one to 300 pixels on the x-axis, and I grab this one and I change the x-axis to negative 300 pixels, I know those are symmetrically offset from the center of my composition, each at 300 pixels now. I like to use that feature a lot for just offsetting things in a nice symmetrical way. Okay, let's take a look at another feature. I'll delete this void and again, select a group of layers. We'll say these three. With all three of those selected, if I click on this button, it's going to average their positions and place the void layer in between all of them. So this is the average center point basically for those layers. This works with 2 or more selected layers, and you can even combine this. So if I grabbed this void and I selected these 2 layers in addition and click the void button, it's now going to create a void in the center of those 3 layers. So it's really customizable and comes in very useful. And if I select all of these layers and hold another modifier, Shift plus Alt or Option, and click the void button, there's going to be a new void created for each one of those layers individually instead of as a group. So if you have a bunch of layers and you just want controllers for all of them, that's how you do it. Another really useful feature of Void that I use all the time is the ability to zero out the transformations of layers. So if I just randomly rotate all of these layers and then I scale some of them down, some of them up, so they all have unique values, I'm gonna show you here in a second. By revealing the position, scale, and rotation, everything is completely different here. We don't have any values really set at neutral values, but if I select all of these and I hold Alt and click on the Void button, it's going to zero out all of the position, set the scales back to 100%, and zero out the rotations as well, even though visually nothing has changed about these layers. The way that this is working under the hood is by creating voids for every single one of those selected layers in the same position, scale, and rotation as those selected layers. It's dropping them to the bottom of the comp, it's turning off their visibility, locking those layers, shying those layers, and then parenting each individual selected layer to their corresponding void. What that multi-step process does is essentially zeroes out their position, their scale, and their rotation, or it sets the scale to 100%. This is a feature that's in Cinema 4D. It's called Freeze Transformations. It's something I think should be native to After Effects, but this is one of those problems that Battle Axe has solved. Now you can do that through Void. This is especially useful for my rigging workflow because the last thing I always do is zero out the position values of the controllers so I can always get back to the neutral state of my character. There are also 2 more features of Void. If I jump over to this comp, I have the artwork of my dog Pixel that I used for the Rubber Hose 3 promotional videos, but I've added in some puppet pins here and I've labeled them. If I just press U to bring them all up, select them and click the Void button, Void is gonna identify that I had puppet pins selected and it's going to generate custom voids with their own little point control icons for every one of those pins, and I can now control all of those pins with independent layers, parent them like regular layers, and parent other things to them. I can't tell you how useful this has become in my own character animation workflow or anything using the Puppet tool. In addition to puppet pins, we can also apply this same kind of control to any 2D point control in After Effects. So if I were to just add, say, a gradient ramp effect to this layer, and I grab the point controls that are driving this ramp, I'll just double click on one of them to reveal it down here in the layer, and I'll control click on the other point control. With both of those selected, again, I'll click the Void button. It's gonna create Void controllers for those 2D point controls. They're parented to the source layer, so wherever it goes, those points are gonna go with it. But now I can control those points just like any other layer in After Effects. You know, maybe I'd wanna add a CC composite effect on top of that so I could blend this gradient with the original artwork and maybe turn the blend with original up a little bit, but not saying this is something I'd actually do, but just trying to give you a little bit of context as to why this might be useful for being able to control these point controls with actual transform controls from a regular layer instead of just the 2D position controls. Those are all the updates with the actual panel, the script UI interface, but in addition to that, we've also created new headless versions of a lot of this same functionality. These headless scripts are meant to be assigned to keyboard shortcuts, so you can add a void, volume, or variant, as well as a void without visibility. You can choose which one you want to use, and we also have the zero selection script. You just copy those over to your main scripts folder, not the script UI panels folder, but the root support files scripts folder for After Effects. Then they'll show up in your scripts menu right here, but you don't need to run them from there. You can go up to your keyboard shortcuts on the edit menu, and then you can search for each one of those. So if I searched for add void, there it is. I could choose either one of these, and under the shortcut column, I could assign a keyboard shortcut to it. So if I press Control Y, that's gonna let me know this is already in use for new solid layer, but that's what I wanna replace. So you can choose which one of those headless scripts you want to use if you want to assign them to keyboard shortcuts. And the main functionality of adding a solid layer, that's still going to remain if you ever need an actual solid or an actual null object that uses a solid instead of a void or a volume. Next up is Beatgrid, which has also gotten a UI refresh. It's also responsive, and it has some new functionality, actually quite a lot of new functionality. This is our tool for keeping track of time. Sometimes you might be working on a project before you have music created or chosen, but you know what the tempo of the music is going to be, and you want to start laying out your graphics to that tempo, or maybe you're not doing any music at all, and you just still want to have that rhythm within the visual elements of your composition. All of these things are what this tool was created for. So let's take a look at our new options. First of all, we can switch between 4/4 and 3/4 time, which gives you 3 or 4 beats per measure. We have the minus and plus signs for increasing or decreasing the BPMs. You can also type in a custom BPM. So if you wanted 140, there you go. Or you could also tap this button to whatever beat you want. And as you do that, it's going to update. One way that I like to do this is just by clicking on the tap button once with my finger, because I don't always trust that I get a steady beat with the mouse click, and then switch to my space bar. As long as I don't do anything else, I can tap the space bar and it's going to do the exact same thing. So I'm just gonna reset that back down to 120 beats per minute. And then we have a quarter note and an eighth note. So these are two different types of beat grids. I'll show you each of them now. Let's click on the first one. It's gonna generate a shape layer guide that doesn't have any contents, but it is nice and vibrant so you can identify it clearly at the top of your layer stack. And it's going to give you markers for measures, as well as colored keyframes for all of the individual notes. I chose quarter notes, so each one of these keyframes represents a quarter note, with the highlighted keyframe being the first count in each one of these measures. And you can even see that these keyframes have values, so they align with the beat, whatever tempo that you set and whichever type of grid you set. So let's add another grid, except this time use eighth notes, and this is gonna generate something that just has twice as many beats per measure. So if you need that precision between keyframes, you have that option. Those are our two different types of beat grids from those buttons. Another feature that we have is snap to frames. This is something that comes up especially in longer compositions. Sometimes the keyframes, one every so often, will be misaligned or placed between frames. If you check on snap to frames when you generate a beat grid, they're always going to be snapped to the nearest keyframe, which more often than not aligns with whatever frame rate you're working in, but this just guarantees that each one of the keyframes for these beats will be aligned to a whole frame. Another thing you might have noticed is that the audio icon is enabled for this layer, and we have an effect up here for tone, because this is actually an audio generating metronome now, not just keyframes for visual alignment. So if I play this back, you actually hear a metronome for each beat, and the first beat of each bar, again, is a different tone. So you can actually hear the difference between beats and keep count as you're working in After Effects. This is easily disabled if that's not a feature you want. Just disable the audio for that layer and it'll go away. The next tool we've updated is Hylian, and this is actually the last update for Hylian because it's kind of become obsolete with advancements in After Effects. But it still has the same refreshed UI, so this scales around now, and we have 2 buttons instead of 1. So let me walk you through what these 2 different buttons do. First of all, just like before, the first button will make an exact duplicate of the layer you have selected with all of its properties linked to the original with expressions. So if I double tap the E key, you're gonna see lots of expressions because there are so many properties on this layer that are all tied back to the source. Now, on its own, this isn't very useful because that's literally just a clone on top of this layer, and I can't move it around because of the expression links to the position or anything. But the original concept for Hylian was basically creating easier mats before we had this new track mat system where you could use one mat for multiple layers. You would need a duplicate of the layer you're trying to mat to for every instance of something that needed to be matted to it. Since that's no longer the case, this feature on its own isn't all that useful. But that's why we added this second button, because it duplicates the selected layers with just the keyframed properties linked. So if I click on that, now I'm going to have fewer expressions if I reveal them because just these 3 properties that have keyframes on them are what has been linked. So I could bring up the position and move the X position around, and now both of these are going to come up at the same time, expand out at the same time, and I can control both of them using the properties from the original layer. So if I wanted to change the Y position of the left window, it's going to affect the right window. And if I wanted to change the animation controls that I've rigged up for here, it's going to affect both of them. So I could dial this back, expand it up. That's a great new option of Hylian. Another thing we could do with the original button is select specific properties that we want to be linked. So if I wanted just the rotation, I could press R to bring up the rotation, select that property, click the Hylian button, and we've got our duplicate, but the only thing linked is that rotation. So I could move this over here. I could even raise it up on the Y position. And now if I rotate the original layer, the duplicate layer is going to rotate with it. Nothing else is being transferred over or parented between these expression links. All of the original keyframes are still there though, so I could offset this maybe and have these come out at different times. The rotations are just always going to match up. And if I undo back to before I click that button, if I hold down Alt or Option while clicking this button, it's going to exclude any selected properties. So let's say I don't want to link the Y position value. I'll select it, hold Option or Alt, and click on that button. And now everything except that Y position is going to be linked. So I can grab this Y position, move it around, and everything else is going to stay linked up with expressions. But that's it for Hylian. Like I said, this is the last update for the tool. If you are a user of Hylian, I would love to hear down in the comments how you use it. Source of truth. Another thing we're big fans of here at Battle Axe is Kbar, which if you're not aware, go click the card above and learn all about it. It's going to change the way that you work inside of After Effects. We get a lot of questions about, could we have this functionality from this Battle Axe tool, but as a Kbar button? And as often as we can, we try to make that functionality possible. And with a recent update to Kbar, this has actually opened the door to make even more possibilities available within a toolbar. We've consolidated all of this functionality, every supported function from Battle Axe tools, into a single Kbar toolbar that we're calling the Kbar Source of Truth. It's laid out right here, and it's designed for you to be able to download all at once and then rearrange however you want into your own personal Kbar. That's the beauty of Kbars. If I go into the settings, I can create my own toolbar that has custom functions for the things that I do most often, and then I can just grab any one of these buttons and drag it into my custom toolbar so that whatever you want accessible can exist where you want it. Now, this is everything all at once. Let's just walk through it really quickly. The first 4 buttons are for our 4 paid tools. So if I click on this, it's going to open up the Rubber Hose 3 panel. If I click on this, there's Overlord. Anubis is really interesting because without it open, it just opens Anubis, but watch this. If I click on it again, it's actually going to execute the Anubis button function and it's going to render out that video. Here's my MP4 with the compression applied from this composition. This was not previously possible. This is actually a really exciting advancement in Kbar. The only caveat is that you have to have the panel open, but it does not need to be visible. So if you don't want to see Anubis all the time, I could just dock it in the same panel group and not have it visible, and that Anubis button is still going to work. It'll run the compression, and once this folder pops up, I'll know it's done, and I have my compressed video. It'll compress at whatever settings you have set up currently under the options, but that way you can just have a single button in your Kbar without taking up more space in your workspace if that's something that you need. Next up is Time Lord. That will also just open up the panel, but those are the first 4 buttons. Next, we have a section for Void. These are all of the same functionalities that we have in the UI panel. We have a Void, Variant, and Volume button, as well as a 0 selection. So if you don't want to have those assigned to keyboard shortcuts, you could have them as Kbar buttons instead. Next up is Butt Capper. This is all the same as what it was before. We've got butt, round, and projecting caps, as well as the maintain stroke width button. Again, something I use all the time. The next section is for Beatgrid. That'll open up the panel just so you can generate your Beatgrid layer, and then you can close the panel out and not have to keep it docked. We have Schmear, Soup Can, and Sandwich. Those are all great tools to have. Next up are the 2 Hylian buttons. So again, if you don't want to dock that panel or have to open it every time you want to use it, you could just throw these buttons into a Kbar menu. These last 2 buttons are for AEUX and Inspector Spacetime. Again, just launching both of those tools. And finally, we have a version number. If you click on this, it's actually going to tell you a lot about what version you're working on, where you can find updates, and more information about how all of this works. But that way you'll know if you're working off of an older version or an updated version. But that is my speed run through what we've been up to here at BattleAxe lately, and I hope that you all get a lot of value out of the hard work that Adam puts into making all of these tools for you. We do have a BattleAxe Discord if you're not aware. Adam is in it, I'm in it. It is full of really helpful people. If you ever need support with any of our tools, that is the best place to get it. You can also be part of shaping future tools, making requests for those problems that make you think, why is this so difficult? Get in the Discord server, let us know, and maybe it'll turn into a BattleAxe official tool. Thank you so much for watching this video. I would love it if you gave me a like, subscribe if you're not already so you can be up to date with all of the videos that I post here on my channel, and I'll see you in the next one.